Before we begin, this video is not anti-Jesus. If anything, it's the opposite. This video is about possibility that many people were never taught the deeper mystical, symbolic, and esoteric dimensions of what his teachings may have actually pointed toward. We're going to discuss early Christianity, hidden texts, Gnosticism, symbolism, mysticism, consciousness, psychology, and the difference between spiritual awakening and institutional religion. Some of this information may challenge what you were taught growing up. Good, because truth should withstand questioning. And if you're willing to think deeply, this video may completely change the way you see spirituality forever. The deeper I studied early Christianity, mystical traditions, forbidden texts, symbolism, and consciousness, the more one question kept haunting me. Why does Jesus sound so different from the religion built around him? Because when you actually study many of the teachings attributed to Jesus, they sound far more focused on inner transformation, awareness, consciousness, ego transcendence, spiritual awakening, than fear, guilt, and blind obedience. And historically, that's because early Christianity was never originally one unified belief system. Most people assume Christianity always existed in the form we know today. Historically, that's not true. Early Christianity was incredibly diverse. Some groups interpreted Jesus literally. Others interpreted his teaching symbolically and mystically. These groups became known broadly as the Gnostics. The word Gnostic literally means direct inner knowing, not blind belief. It's knowing through experience. And this changes everything, because many of the Gnostic groups believe salvation came through awareness, self-knowledge, spiritual awakening, and transformation of the consciousness, not merely external religion participation. Now here's where things become really interesting. There were entire collections of early Christian texts excluded from the biblical canon. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, Pistis, Sophia. And when the Nag Hammadi library discovery happened in Egypt in 1945, historians suddenly discovered entire collections of writings that revealed early Christianity was far more mystical than most people realized. For example, the Gospel of Thomas barely focuses on crucifixion or church doctrine the way modern Christianity does. Instead, it focused heavily on hidden sayings, self-knowledge, awakening, perception, and inner transformation. One of its most famous lines says, "The kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you." Think about how radical that statement actually is. Because if the kingdom is within, then spirituality becomes internal, not external. Now the focus shifts from institutions, rituals, hierarchy toward consciousness, awareness, transformation, self-observation. That is a massive difference. Now, another thing that most people overlook at is Jesus almost never taught plainly. He taught through parables, metaphors, through symbolism, layered meanings. Why? Well, because ancient mystery traditions believed truth had to be realized internally, not just memorized intellectually. That statement alone implies that not everyone would understand the deeper meaning. Mystical traditions throughout history believed sacred teachings had multiple layers: literal, symbolic, psychological, and even spiritual. And once you understand the symbolic interpretation, many teachings begin to read differently. One of the most repeated symbols across mystical traditions is light. In Pistis, Sophia, in the Gospel of Thomas, in Hermetic teachings, in the Egyptian mystery schools, the Corpus Hermeticum, light consistently symbolizes awareness, divine intelligence, truth, consciousness, and awakening. Darkness symbolizes unconsciousness, ignorance, illusion. Awareness itself has always been connected to light. In Pistis Sophia specifically, the soul is portrayed almost as it's trapped in confusion and ascending back toward light through understanding and spiritual awakening. That's incredibly psychological when you actually think about it. Now let's go deeper. When Jesus says, "Deny yourself," most people interpret this literally. But mystically and psychologically, this may refer to ego, false identity built from fear, trauma, status, validation, attachment, conditioning. Modern psychology now understands that much of human behavior is unconscious patterning. Ancient mystics understood this too. That's why so many spiritual traditions revolve around death, rebirth, and transformation. These are often symbolic representations of transformation of consciousness, the death of the false self and awakening into awareness. Now here's where things become controversial. Mysticism focuses on direct spiritual experience. Institutional systems focus on external authority. And historically, those two things often clash because a deeply conscious person becomes harder to manipulate, harder to control through fear, harder to psychologically dominate. This is one reason why many mystical traditions were labeled heretical, excluded, suppressed, pushed outside of orthodoxy. Not necessarily because questioning was evil, but because awareness changes people. A person who begins observing their own mind, questioning their conditioning, recognizing their fear-based controls, becomes psychologically independent. And psychologically independent people are difficult to control. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Because once you begin studying these ancient texts side by side, you realize that they're all pointing toward the same core ideas through different symbolism. In the Gospel of Thomas, the emphasis is on awakening through self-knowledge. Jesus repeatedly speaks almost like a mystical teacher, guiding people towards perception itself, not religion, perception. The text constantly implies people are spiritually asleep, and awakening comes through inner realization. Then you move into Pistis, Sophia, and suddenly the symbolism becomes even deeper. Because this text describes the soul descending into lower realms of confusion, ignorance, and attachment, then struggling to ascend back towards light. Psychologically, that sounds incredibly similar to the human condition itself. People are trapped in fear, in ego, trauma, attachments, their unconscious behaviors, trying to return to awareness, return to wholeness, return to truth. And when you study the Gospel of Mary, you see a massive emphasis on inner spiritual understanding. Mary speaks about visions, consciousness, the ascent of the soul, overcoming fear. And what's fascinating is the disciples question her authority. That tension between inner knowing and institutional authority has existed for thousands of years. Then you move into Corpus Hermeticum, and the ideas become almost cosmic. The Hermetic teachings repeatedly describe humanity as containing a divine mind trapped within material existence. Again, awakening, remembering, consciousness, ascent. The same themes keep appearing. Even later, esoteric texts like the Kabbalion continue emphasizing that reality is deeply connected to mind, perception, consciousness, vibration, and your inner state. And whether people agree with every claim or not, across civilizations, across centuries, across completely different cultures, the same core message keeps repeating. Human beings are asleep, and awakening changes reality. That may be the deepest hidden teaching of all. Now here's the part most people miss. This information is useless if it stays intellectual. The real purpose of ancient spiritual teachings is transformation, not entertainment, not aesthetics. Transformation. Because once you become conscious of your inner world, you begin changing your outer world. Most people unconsciously create their lives through fear, emotional reactions, limiting beliefs, unconscious habits, distraction, attachments, and negative self-perceptions. Ancient mystical traditions believed your inner state shapes your experience of reality, not through magic, through psychology, perception, behavior, energy, awareness. Because your internal state influences things like your decisions, your emotional patterns, your relationships, your confidence, your focus, your actions, even your opportunities. This is why nearly every mystical tradition emphasized meditation, silence, self-observation, discipline, mindfulness, emotional control, because awareness interrupts unconscious living. So how do you actually begin applying this? Well, first, learn to observe your thoughts without immediately reacting to them. Most people are completely controlled by their mind. Mystical traditions teach awareness creates separation between you and the thought, and that alone changes your life. Second, pay attention to your emotional state daily. Your emotional patterns become habits. Your habits become identity, and the identity shapes your reality. If you constantly live in fear, anger, resentment, hopelessness, you unconsciously reinforce those states psychologically and behaviorally. Third, protect your attention. Attention is energy. Modern society constantly pulls your consciousness outward with endless scrolling, stimulation, distractions, outrage, noise. Ancient teachings repeatedly emphasize silence because silence, again, increases awareness, and awareness increases clarity. Fourth, be intentional with what you repeatedly tell yourself, because eventually your subconscious accepts repetition as truth, and your subconscious influences your behavior, your confidence, your emotional response, your self-image, and your decision-making. Fifth, learn emotional discipline, not suppression, discipline. There's a difference. Reacting emotionally to everything keeps you unconscious. Observing before reacting creates awareness. That is power. And finally, spend time alone. Seriously. Most people avoid silence because silence forces self-confrontation. The transformation begins the moment you stop running from yourself. Maybe the greatest hidden teaching was never about fear. Maybe it was about awakening. Maybe salvation symbolized liberation from unconsciousness itself. And maybe the reason mystical teachings continue resurfacing through history, despite suppression, controversy, even misunderstandings, is because something inside humanity recognizes them. A deeper knowing, a deeper memory, that there is more to consciousness, spirituality, and human existence than we were ever taught to believe. And once you begin seeing the symbolism behind the words, you can never fully unsee it again. And if you want to start studying these texts and ideas for yourself, comment below. I'll send you the list of books and ancient texts I recommend beginning with first. Until the next one.